Hamites looked at the world coming into being, Nun Pata Atum. And what I find to be so very interesting is that as you look at this and you look at the rock-hewn churches underground, and you can almost see that Nun is the waters in the middle of the earth. And rising up out of these waters comes the rock-hewn churches, but then on top of the earth, where it's level, is where we as humanity walk in our consciousness. When you look at the principles of Ma'at, and when you look at the principles of those of Ethiopia, when you look at the role that Africans have played in history, you can get a sense of the deeper understandings of what would bring people to develop that. And what the Kemites called it was Ma'at. And as we said before, the ostrich feather can only be found in this part of Africa, and they brought them from Somalia. That was one of the things that they imported from Punt, was the ostrich. They imported baboons. They imported a lot of different animals out of this area. And when you begin to look at that, and of course Ma'at is the ostrich feather. It's symbolized by the ostrich feather. So the key is to understand how very important it is to understand Ma'at, righteousness, justice, and balance. The ability for society to balance itself in its oneness, to be able to return back into itself. That you look at the ostrich again coming up out of this region here, this northeastern region, the horn of what they call, they call it the Horn of Africa, and you begin to understand that the universe is like an ostrich also, in that an ostrich, when it runs in a zigzag way. Its egg is in an elliptical shape, just like the universe is. And as Africans looked up into the skies, they looked within, they saw that there was a metaphor that united what was above to what was below. And what they attempted to do was to balance it. And that's why I said Africans brought God, and they brought humanity up to God in order to understand the Godhood. In many African faith systems, while it may not be said outright, they never prayed inside to a God. They never prayed outside to a God, because the fundamental principle was that all human beings were gods on earth, and that within us was the concept that we ourselves could rise to that level of godhood if we followed a particular path of righteousness, of justice, of truth. And this was depicted by the ostrich feather. Dr. Rosalind Jeffries taught us that the feather is used in a very interesting way, and we could also relate this to Native Americans and the way in which they use feathers. But that the feathers itself is such that if you put a feather in your hand, and if you hold it too tight, you'll squash it. Sometimes you're afraid of truth. You're afraid that it's going to get out of your hands. You don't trust yourself to be truthful. Therefore, you hold tight. And sometimes when you hold too tight, while you may be truthful, you're squashing the truth. At the same time, on the other side of the pole, if you hold it too lightly, the slightest wind can blow the truth or the feather out of your hands. So truth is the kind of principle that you got to hold just so tightly, but just so loosely, so that it doesn't get out of your hands. And it's important that as we develop these concepts of spirituality, that we understand that to African folk there is but one truth. And that this one truth finds itself in manifold, in many different ways. And as we begin to develop our new definition of ourselves, the second principle of Kwanzaa, Kujichagulia, that we will begin to redefine what spirituality really is, because spirituality is universal. Religion is selective. It doesn't make a difference if you're Rosicrucian, if you are Buddhist, if you are Zen Buddhist, if you are Christian, Muslim, or Jew. There is but one faith system. There is but one word, and that word is truth. And out of that truth, there comes everything else that becomes the moral code. Out of the moral code comes the civilization, or the intermingling of people. Out of the intermingling of people comes society, and out of society comes civilization. Out of civilization comes technology, which represents how you respect your civilization, and then you get right back into your Godhead, because what you create is a reflection of how you feel about the greater being that is all around us.
Booker, I think that one of our greatest gifts to the world is our spirituality. And I think our most misunderstood contribution about who we are and what we are and about our cosmology and how we see the world is the way we relate to the world. And you can only understand that through spirituality. Someone once asked me, I don't, if the black man was in charge, if he was the president, if black folk was ruling the world, I don't think it would be a better place to live. I mean, look at Africa and look at America. Here we got cars, we got bathrooms, we got running water, we got hot. I mean, we're mastered nature. Hey, man, don't tell me black folk could have done a better job, because when I look at Africa, I don't see it. What do you have to say?
Look at the Moors. And if you look at the Moors, you'll understand. The book edited by Dr. Ivan Van Sertima called The Golden Age of the Moor. Or you can look at Stanley Lane Poole's work on the Moors, The Story of the Moors. And you will understand that when Africans in the year 710 AD went into Spain, again they called it Al-Andalus. Today it's called Spain and Portugal, or the Iberian Peninsula. They brought into Europe running water, air conditioning, heat, soap, foods, clothes, music, moral. In fact, a great deal of many individuals in Al-Andalus supported the African explorers because of the barbarity of the Visigothic kings. When African Moors in Granada and Seville and Cordoba lived in plush palaces, European monarchs were living in barns. Africans brought to Europe everything that we now have. So Africans not only could do it, we could do it better. And it's important to understand that you may be looking at an America with cars that create pollution. You can look at tall buildings when the steel is put in the water, creates air pollution. You can talk about sky travel, that every time a plane or a rocket goes up, it creates destruction in the atmosphere. You can call that progress. I wouldn't. When you look at the African world, you look at a world based on nature. And just like I know the sun will set and rise between today and tomorrow, Africans knew that their civilization would rise and fall the same way. It's important to understand that Africa gave the world everything that we have today. We have built upon that. It's important to understand that there is nothing that exists today that Africans or people of color have not had a hand in. You cannot count to one, you cannot count from 1 to 10 without thanking the Dravidian Moors for having brought that. Our number system, although it's called Hindu-Arabic, in fact is Dravidian Moorish. It is not Hindu-Arabic. It is Dravidian Moorish, because the Hindus got it from the Dravidians and the Arabs got it from the Moors. It's important to understand that we will see what the future holds. Every civilization has its rise and fall. In Africa, Africans ruled Europe. In fact, it was Napoleon that said that Africa begins in the Pyrenees. The Pyrenees is in southern France. It's important to understand that Napoleon in 1798 went to Egypt with approximately 172 of his most intelligent individuals, along with an army. Upon returning back from there, Europe flourished. In fact, a few years later, a man by the name of Count Volta received an award for creating a battery. Yet we see direct evidence of him learning how to build the battery by looking at the Djed column of ancient Egypt. You want more information? A brother by the name of Nur Ankamen wrote a book entitled The African Origins of Electromagnetism. We're living an illusion, and as long as we live this illusion, we will never know, and we will never be able to go back to what we could do. I believe we're devolving. I believe that we are going backwards in time. I believe that the way in which we feel towards each other is going to create the kind of situation that's going to catapult us forward. I've often asked, how thick does the glass have to get in the bank before we understand we're having a very serious problem? The glass is getting thicker, people are moving away from each other, bridges are falling, planes are crashing, water is killing, bacteria is greater now than ever before, we're sicker than ever before. The first successful cesarean birth occurred in the middle 1800s when European doctors went to Uganda and witnessed their cesarean birth. The European doctors brought that method back to Europe, and Europe had its first successful cesarean birth. If you don't believe me, look at Charles Finch's work and look at the picture that was drawn by the European who watched the Ugandans during the cesarean birth. These are facts. I'm not emotional. I don't dislike anybody. I'm not saying this in a sense of superiority or inferiority. I don't believe in that. I don't believe I'm superior because I'm African, but I believe that I am supreme because I know who I am. I don't measure myself against another human being. I measure myself against myself. So I hope to be a better person tomorrow than I was today. And I pray to be a better person today than I was yesterday. And that is what African folk. Yes, I'm competitive, but I compete with myself. I don't compete with other people. Therefore, I don't worry about what my partner has because I appreciate his greatness because I may shine. See, everybody can't be sunshine. Sometimes you got to be moonshine because the moon doesn't have a light. The moon's reflection, moonlight is the reflection of the sun on the moon. Someday it's my day. Someday it is my day to shine. Other days it's someone else's turn to shine, but hopefully if I position myself right in that person's life, their light will shine on me. As an African people, we understood this. Therefore, what was good for one was good for the community, and what was good for the community was good for everybody. This is the kind of society that we've got to get back to. When we think of the things that are happening all around us today, we've got to understand that a change has got to come. You'll either be a part of it or you won't. They laughed at Noah for 40 years. The brother was building the boat. He said a flood was coming. Everybody laughed at him because the sun was out. But he prophesied that there was going to be a flood. Well, Marcus Garvey and Malcolm X and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad all prophesied that there was destruction coming. And everybody laughed at them. They criticized them. They continue to today. Yet the very words that they spoke back then are coming to fruition now. Those who were smart enough to build their boat, to get ready for what was coming, will withstand what's coming. And those that don't will not. But it doesn't take a lot of people to create a nation. So either you're part of it or you're not. My question is, are you going to miss the boat?